Hello, and welcome to our session on what is the next frontier for broadcasting in the cloud, professional quality live content production. I am John Footen. I'm Managing Director at Deloitte. I'm responsible for our media technology for broadcasters and studios. Quick bit of background about me. I've been in the television business for over 30 years. Originally, I was trained as a cinematographer and worked on a lot of different kinds of productions, both live and pre-recorded productions. I then got a computer science degree and had the opportunity then to get into technology development and was involved in the early days of us moving as an industry from analog or physical media into computer-based ways of doing things. And then in the last 13 years, I've gotten into consulting and had the opportunity to work with broadcasters and studios all over the world in transforming their technical operations and their technical stacks that support them. So I've had an opportunity to see a lot of different transformations, and we'll get into them. But first, let me talk quickly about what we're going to cover today. So first, I'm going to do a very brief overview of the technology history of media. Then I'm going to jump into the continued migration to cloud, it's already underway, what it's going to mean for broadcasters. And then we're going to dive a bit deeper into what are the real challenges that cloud presents for broadcasting media. And then we're going to dive a bit deeper into what is the next big challenge for the industry in cloud, which is production, live professional production in cloud. And let me just take a moment to explain what I mean by professional, because obviously a lot of things have been produced in the cloud. We've had various types of video platforms out for some time. But what I'm talking about here is the kind of quality of production that you see when you watch professional sports leagues all over the world, in terms of the quality of picture, the density and complexity of the production, and things like that. I'm talking about that level of production. So then we'll get into, after that, we'll get into the quick overview of what is the current state of production and what we're doing these days with production. And then we'll get into a more detailed examination of what would be true in a future state. And then we're going to finally wrap up with some next steps for you to consider as you make a move to cloud. All right. So let's start with a quick review of the major eras in technology for broadcasting. I have had the opportunity to live in all four of these eras. So the first era was the one that originally began in the 40s and the 50s and lasted for over 40 years. This is the analog era of television broadcasting production. This was characterized by physical and analog media. The quality and the quantity of what we did back then was constrained by the physical nature of the media technologies that we were using. So I would shoot things on film and wait for days for those to be developed, or I would make things on videotape and it would have to move in a linear fashion when you were editing it. It was all very expensive, all of that equipment that it took to produce professional content, and it was very difficult to operate and maintain. It required significant specialized skill sets. The second era that we got into was the digital era. This was an era that arose during primarily the 80s and the 90s, around 20 years in this era. It was much more sophisticated. With digital media, we were able to do things that we weren't able to do with analog media. Things were the quality was being better able to be maintained. We weren't losing generations if we were making copies because it was digital. But I think it was also characterized by the use of specialty equipment. This wasn't your general purpose computer that we were using. or even if we did use a general purpose computer, we installed quite a bit of custom and specialty hardware into that computer in order to make it work. This was allowed for high definition to arise. The old standards were based on a different standard definition. And because it was digital, we were able to, and things were starting to shrink in size and things like that, the quantities of production increased as well. We then entered the third era towards the end of the 90s and into the aughts and up to the most current time, which was the data center era. This is basically the ability to use COTS type infrastructure, commercial off-the-shelf infrastructure, to build media environments. So we can use traditional computers, traditional IT components, traditional IT technologies and approaches, but all of this was characterized by being on-prem for a variety of reasons, which we will get into later as we talk about cloud. The use of this kind of commodity technology that was being subsidized by many other industries was, the result of that was a massive decrease in the costs. Everything became software, was the primary thing being sold that was special to the industry. And the quantity and quality again exploded. And now we're in this fourth era, which is cloud. This has been driven primarily by the need for elasticity, service orientation in the way that we get things done. We needed to push the commodity tech of IT downward and away from the media businesses. The media businesses needed to focus on media and the media side of the stack. The machinations of dealing with infrastructure is something that is not core to their mission or core to their DNA, and therefore it was good to take that and move it off premises to a third party. So everything is now, from the media perspective, is moving towards just being about software and services, software as a service, other types of business processes as a service, and that allows the media businesses to focus on creating new forms of entertainment. And you can expect another massive explosion in the sophistication of the media that we're going to be seeing, as well as the quantity, again, of media that's available as cloud has been adopted. A couple of notes about each of these four eras. Each of them taught us lessons that were new, but it's important to remember the lessons of each era. As I went through the analog to digital transition and the digital to data center transition, we learned lessons about how to adapt from legacy environments and things like that that are going to apply in the cloud transition. So for those of you who have been through some of these transitions, it's important to remember that just because this is another approach to doing this doesn't mean that what we learned about how to do it isn't still just as valid as it was when we did it before. And the other thing I'll note is a lot of people forget how unstable things were at the beginning of each of these eras. When we went digital, just as one example, it was not stable. For those who might remember that era, when we switched from analog to digital, there was a lot of complaints about how digital couldn't do it, and how digital was filled with bugs and crashed and had lip sync issues and all kinds of problems. That kind of stuff is going to continue as we make every technology transition, and we all know that over time these environments stabilize. And I just want people to keep that in mind as they think about the transitions. So let me talk about why we're doing this. Why are we going to cloud? Well, I think the core reason to do this is pretty much the core reason that we do all of our changes in the industry, which is in some way related to money, or any other industry. Going to cloud will allow for things to be more efficient and cost efficient, and I will get into some more details on that. But some of the benefits that we get if we do go to cloud is, first of all, platform elasticity. We're able to scale our media operations as needed. Some media operations will build their entire tech stack to handle the worst case scenario that might occur every once in a while. So as an example, the Olympics. Many broadcasters will build special environments just for the Olympics and then tear them down until the next Olympics and maybe build a different version of it. These kinds of cases where you have to stand up for a special event or a special situation, those are ones that cloud is perfect for because it's easier and you stand it up and you pay for it when it's stood up, and when you take it down, it's taken down. The same thing with pop-up channels. Pop-up channels is this idea that you have these one-off channels that you want to put up. And if you do it today, when we build our traditional environments today on-prem, we buy channels and channels of playout that we may or may not use, or that may only be used occasionally. In cloud, we only have to pay for them when we stand them up. Built-in resiliency. A massive amount of the historic engineering effort done by engineers in television and broadcasting has been about keeping the systems up, keeping the infrastructure up, and 100% uptime. And that's a lot of engineering. Well, if the infrastructure is at its core being managed by another party, i.e. cloud, then you have the opportunity to push that significant engineering effort, or at least a great portion of it, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of the other things, but a great portion of it into that third party to be responsible for making sure that the core technology they built and the supporting environments that they're in, the data centers that they're in, are engineered in a way that is 100% up all the time. But I will say be careful, because you need to make sure you architect appropriately in cloud. You need to have multiple places, geographic zones that you place the technology in, so that if there is an issue in one particular zone or region, that you are able to recover from that. So you still need to think about these things, but the core of keeping, whether or not there's UPSs and enough power supplies and things, and those kinds of things that we've had to deal with in the past are now being dealt with by the other party. One thing that's really interesting to me about cloud versus the way we've built systems in the past when it comes to this question of resiliency is that we can have variable resiliency. And it can be resilient at different hours and times and channels and things like that. When we have built these systems historically, we built them to be highly resilient. A 1-to-1, or I'm sorry, a 1+1 type of architecture or infrastructure where we always had an alternate backup that could do everything. In this case, with the cloud, we could maybe feel that way about prime time and daytime, and then overnight, maybe we'll take it down, and it's okay if it takes a little while to spin up a backup channel if something goes down. We can take our lower value channels and make them more, N+1. We can do a lot of different things. There's a lot of different ideas about how to approach disaster recovery and resiliency that are possible in cloud that would not be possible if we're purchasing and buying and building for ourselves. Op model. Let's focus on letting the broadcasters do what they know best. Broadcasting has a lot of unique subject matter expertise, a lot of unique skill sets that people need to understand, unique use cases, unique workflows, and let's focus the skill sets of those people on that and leave the infrastructure, the standard, I guess you could say, standard IT skill sets to be left for those that third party to manage. Security, infrastructure updates, and things like that. Leaving those in the hands of that third party allows you to focus your technology and your engineering staff on the specialty areas that are available or that are required for this environment. Emerging technology. Well, it's no secret that the media business is not the largest industry. In fact, it's one of the smallest industries. And therefore, the IT world, the general writ large IT world, is much, much larger than the media technology world. And the more we can leverage the speed and growth of technologies in IT to allow us to do more interesting experiences, like with AI or whatever, stand up and pilot those, integrate and improve them. That's what cloud will do, because the cloud is going to continue to evolve because of all the different industries that it serves, not just media only. So we'll be able to do that. But also, one other point to note is that the cloud will enable new media businesses to stand up more quickly. More software as a service, business process as a service type of options out of the cloud will allow a company that may not have a lot of infrastructure to stand up capabilities more quickly. So that's also very interesting. Finally, remote working. One of the problems with on-prem technology is that we have to put the people typically where the technology is. In cloud, none of it is on-prem, or very little of it is on-prem. And so we have the option to place personnel wherever it makes sense to them, to the organization. So it doesn't all have to be in Los Angeles and New York or wherever. We can start to have lower cost options for where people live and work. We'll be able to improve their lifestyles. A lot of people in the broadcasting industry live on the road historically, traveling around, helping to do these productions. We'll reduce travel. We'll have more disaster recovery options with the human side of this if the people are more diversely located geographically. So that's one of the other things that the cloud will enable for us. So challenges. Let me dive into this a bit. So perhaps the most important thing to think about is the sync and timing issue. Media organizations have lagged on adopting computers, data centers, and cloud for a good reason. I mean, we've been behind on all of this, and that is because there are some inherent challenges to media that are not seen in other industries. Cloud use cases are typically asynchronous, right? What you do in cloud, it may be very quick, but it doesn't have to be real time. And that's typical with the cloud. In the case of media, we're talking about things that are isochronous. And let me explain what that means, because it's not a term that many people come across. It is a term that means that the time moves at a constant rate. Basically, when you watch TV, you can't watch it faster than it's occurring. So you, as the final consumption device, so to speak, are going to only be able to consume that media at the pace at which it's being given to you. It's the same thing with capturing it. Real life happens in a certain period of time, and so the capturing of the life the material is going to happen in that period of time. In the case of live sports, those two things you want to line up as fast and as quickly as possible. You want the difference between those two times to be as low as possible, and then for them to be constant. So that's an unusual scenario. There aren't very many, I'm not going to say there's none, but there aren't that many use cases for computing or cloud technology where that's the requirement. And we have to consider three kinds of latencies when we build any kind of system, and this is true also in the cloud. One is the latency between parties that are working on the media. So, they're in a Super Bowl, there will be hundreds of people that are coordinated to make that show. And they're coordinated in real time. When they're working over an intercom. They're looking at pictures at the same time. Are they seeing the same picture at the same time? Are they hearing each other with low enough latency that what a director is saying is being acted upon in a rapid way? So that's one of the latencies we need to consider. Another is what they call operational latency, which is if I press a button to play the next clip, to put up a graphic, how long between the time I press that button and when it appears on the screen? We have historically had very low latencies so that we can operate these very sophisticated live shows, and cloud can add latency, and so it's important that the latency be acceptable in operating the system. And another latency that we have to consider is the end-to-end latency. How much is the time between the input and the output? If you're watching sports, if the if the goal is made, you want to make sure that it's not the person listening to it on radio doesn't hear it too many seconds before the person who's watching it on TV. You want to keep that latency as low as possible. That will be especially true as sports betting increases in the future for us to consider. And finally, don't forget that we process video and audio sometimes separately. We do things to the audio, we do things to the video. They're separated, but they need to come back together in time. So we have to, within the systems, keep all of this in time. Another important technical challenge is path diversity. We need to make sure that our signals, because they cannot go down, that we have two places that it's flowing through at all times, and that before it reaches its endpoint, there's a way to cut between those two that is invisible to the viewer, so that they never see it. Human beings can see or hear interruptions very quickly, and so we need to have extremely fast switchover between diverse paths, and many of the cloud providers are working on that issue. Another is the bandwidth requirements. Video, especially 4K or even 8K in the future, are very high bandwidth environments, especially when we're dealing with the high quality that we need for production of professional media. And that has made the economics of the cloud a little more challenging than it has been historically. Big files have to get moved around. In fact, egress is the main point of broadcasting, and sometimes one of the more expensive things. I will say that companies like AWS are working to address these concerns in their pricing approaches, and it's a good thing. Different use cases have different areas that are important. Another one, and finally, is interoperability. The solutions that we use in media are specific. The solutions that make those beautiful Super Bowl pictures, they are specialty stuff done by relatively small technology companies, and they haven't migrated them to cloud. We have to interoperate between multiple small vendors of technology, many of whom don't have the engineering capability in many cases to move to cloud very quickly. The thing that I'm trying to get to here is that this is what we're at now. This is the stage we're at now. We're getting people native to cloud. The vendors are coming native to cloud. And we need to think, as we actually build these systems, about making sure that we interoperate between legacy, some people who have just lift and shifted to cloud, and those that are cloud native. Eventually, all of the technology will be cloud native, just like, remember I said before about switching from analog to digital. We had to deal with both for a while. We're going to have to deal with both when it comes to our software vendors here, but over time, everything will be cloud native. Now let me just focus for the last few minutes here on sports production. So in our current state, and I'll review it in a little more detail, the problem is we have a labor-intensive process that's all on site. We're delivering one, maybe a few outputs from that on-site production, and it's pretty standard at this point. In the future, though, we can see being able to utilize drones and cameras, swarms to scale, the venue. We see being able to eliminate on-site intermediaries like a truck outside of a stadium, and be able to produce from anywhere, and to offer, different versions of the content well beyond just a few into potentially the millions. And I'll talk about that. But let's quickly review what the problem is today. The problem today, fundamentally, if you look at this slide, and I won't go through every detail of it, is that all of the source materials that you see have to go through a lot of extensive wiring that's on site and end up at trucks. If you see the trucks there in number 3, they end up at the trucks, and the trucks are the ones that are pulling together the core of the show. So there's a single point. All those sources have been funneled to 1 or 2 versions that are at the core there. And more importantly, all the people and all of the technology had to be moved to that site in order for it to be produced there. That then is sent to a master control environment, which is where we finalize the signal for broadcast itself, adding on logos and doing other things that are needed for broadcast, and then finally distribute it out through NPVDs and others to the end customers. Well, where can we go? Well, there's a lot of places we can go. First of all, let's look at eliminating the wires. Let's do something like 5G in the field, whether it's a private 5G environment or maybe even the public one, which will allow us to swarm cameras. I mean, being able to have many, many more cameras on a field of play is going to enable for such diversity in production that we don't have today. Let's get those into the cloud. Once they're in the cloud, you have all sources in the cloud, and you have the ability to have AI assist with both selecting images as well as distributing many, many different versions that might be customized in different ways for different viewers. And of course, you have access to all of this content in the cloud. None of it's left on the cutting room floor, as we used to say. It's all there. It can be archived for especially important events and allow for all kinds of monetization downstream. This, of course, then still goes through our distributions, but you know, if you're in the cloud, there's a whole bunch of, like I said, you can create a whole bunch of different customized versions, and so the end customer is going to get options for a new experience. I'm personally really excited about this because I see the opportunity for a creative explosion that we have not had before in the industry, and you know, that we haven't had in a while. New options for shows, new options for productions that will be very exciting for those who are going to be working in this new future state. So to wrap up, I'm very excited about this 4th generation of technology. I think, like I said, it's going to allow for new creative possibilities, new technical possibilities, allowing media companies to focus on the content rather than the infrastructure. I am quite confident that the vendors in our space are going to catch up. They're going to rise up and evolve as is needed. I think we're also going to see with cloud more broadcast services at a bigger picture, broadcast processes as a service being offered, because once you put it in the cloud, you can offer it to everyone, and therefore you will be able to see new organizations stand up their capabilities in ways that they haven't been able to before. I'm talking about services like production control rooms in the cloud, master control in the cloud, and all this is going to enable the new entrants to jump in more quickly. This is going to happen at a faster and faster pace. We have always, as I said when we talked about the 4 eras, we have gotten through each of those eras as we needed to. But if you're thinking of going through this, and we're going to succeed at this one too, as you're thinking about this, here are some things for you to consider. One, this is not just a technological shift. This is a big thing for the people and process side of this. You need to transition your staff, et cetera, et cetera. Do know that there is a business case for this. We have done many of them in our work with clients. There is a positive cost savings over traditional approaches to continuing to evolve your organization. So what you need to do is pull together your roadmap. Think about the cycles of change you're going to go to. Consider your legacy, but don't let it completely define what you're going to do. Consider building an MVP in a greenfield way and move to that. Get started on it because this is the time. I want to thank you for this. That's about it for today. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I just love talking about this stuff. Just reach out to me at the email address you see here. Thank you for watching, and a quick reminder to take the survey and rate the session. Thank you.